We're just trying to take care of you, Beatrice. You don't need to worry about anything. That's what Marilyn said, sweet voice, soft smile, and while she spoke those comforting words, she drained my accounts, forged my name, and remodeled my legacy into her brand. She took my antiques, my identity, my silence, and she took my son, not by love, but by control. For a long time I said nothing. I baked the pies. I smiled for the photos. I played the doting old woman, but I was never hers to fool. You see, I didn't spend 30 years as a clinical psychologist without learning how to spot a manipulator, and once I had enough, I sold the house right out from under them. This is the story of how I was robbed, and how I took back everything, one signature at a time. My name is Beatrice Langley. I'm 74 years old, a widow, and a retired psychologist. I spent most of my life helping people understand emotional manipulation and unhealthy relationships. I never thought I'd end up living through one myself. I live alone in Langley Mansion, the house my late husband Arthur and I built together. For years it was full of life. We worked, argued, laughed, and dreamed inside those walls. After he passed away, everything went quiet. I learned to live with silence. I made tea in the mornings, read books in the study, tended to my little garden, and pretended I was fine. That peace ended one afternoon when my doorbell rang. It was my son, Julian. He looked tired, not just from lack of sleep, but tired in the kind of way that sits behind a man's eyes. "Mom," he said, "I just need to stay for a while. I'm divorced, lost my job. I'll figure things out soon." I didn't even think twice. He's my son. "Come home, Julian," I said. "This door will always be open to you." But I didn't know he wasn't coming home alone. Behind him stood a woman, beautiful, confident, glowing like someone used to cameras. She smiled at me. "Hi, Mrs. Langley. I'm Marilyn Reyes. I've heard so much about you." Her voice was sweet, her handshake firm. There was something about her that felt rehearsed. She didn't ask to come in. She just stepped inside like she already belonged there. That evening, I cooked dinner. Roast chicken, Julian's favorite. Marilyn didn't eat much. She talked about her job. She's a life coach, she said. She runs online workshops, helping people heal their energy and let go of toxic attachments. I didn't understand much of it, but I smiled and listened. The next morning, I found her walking through the house with her phone, recording short videos. She loved the light near the window, said it gave a healing vibe. A few hours later, there was a ring light in the hallway. By the end of the week, there were two. When I asked her what she was doing, she said, "Just setting up my workspace. The house feels so inspiring, Beatrice." Beatrice, not Mom, not Mrs. Langley, just Beatrice. She said it like she owned the air between us. At first, I tried to be polite. I told myself she's young, this is her way of coping, maybe it'll pass. But within days, the house began to change. She moved Arthur's desk to another wall, better light for filming. She lit scented candles that made my eyes water. And one morning, I walked in to find her filming in Arthur's old study. The title of her video on the screen read, "How to Heal from Controlling Parents." I stood there quietly, watching her speak to thousands of strangers about forgiveness and energy. The woman was using my husband's study, our home, as her backdrop for self-promotion. Later that night, I told her I'd appreciate it if she didn't use that room. She smiled and said, "Well, of course. I completely understand." The next day, I saw the camera back in the same place. Julian said I was overreacting. "Mom, she's just working. Don't take it personally." But the truth is, it wasn't about work anymore. It was about control. She was slowly making the house hers, moving things, changing routines, setting the tone. Even her voice started to echo through the halls more than mine. One afternoon, I caught her with one of Arthur's old notebooks, his handwriting, his research. I told her it was private. She looked up and said, "Sometimes holding on to the past keeps us from healing." I said quietly, "And sometimes touching what isn't yours shows you don't know what respect means." That was the first time she looked at me without pretending to smile. That night, I started writing again. Not research, not reflections, just notes, dates, times, little details, the way she moved furniture, the way Julian avoided eye contact when I asked about money, the unopened letters that suddenly disappeared from the mailbox. I wrote it all down in a small red notebook. It wasn't about paranoia, it was about proof. Because when people start to gaslight you, make you question your own memory, writing becomes survival. By the second week, my house didn't feel like mine anymore. They called the living room our filming space. They called the kitchen our set. And one night, I heard Marilyn's voice from downstairs during a live stream. Sometimes the hardest people to heal are our parents, the ones who taught us control through guilt. Her audience cheered. They had no idea she was talking about me. That night, I closed my bedroom door and said to myself, they think I'm old. They think I'll forget. But they're wrong. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I just wrote in my notebook, they've started taking pieces of my house, but they won't take me. And I meant it. Langley Mansion used to feel like safety. Now it felt like a stage. Every smile felt rehearsed. Every thank you felt like strategy. And I could feel it, the shift. That quiet, sinking realization that something in your own home is no longer safe. That was the day I stopped being polite. I didn't fight yet, but I decided one thing. The next move would be mine. It started quietly. At first, Marilyn said she just needed to film a few short clips for her channel. Then, a week later, she was doing live sessions 3 times a day, right there in my living room. She'd rearranged the furniture, pulled back the curtains, and placed a soft beige rug over the old wooden floor Arthur had polished by hand. She told her followers, "Welcome to the healing atrium, a safe space for emotional growth." That was my living room she was talking about. My home turned into her stage. Every morning I'd hear her cheerful voice echoing down the hall. "Good morning, beautiful souls." She'd start her live stream with the smell of incense filling the air and background music I never wanted to hear in my house. She called it soothing frequency. To me, it sounded like someone trying to hypnotize their guilt away. At first, I tried to stay out of the way. I'd take my tea to the garden, pretend I didn't hear her talking about toxic family patterns and the art of letting go. But one day, I made the mistake of watching. She was sitting in my chair, my favorite armchair, the one Arthur used to read in. The camera was pointed perfectly toward the mantel, where family photos used to sit before she reorganized them into boxes. Behind her was the painting of Arthur and me, half cut off by her frame. I'll never forget her words. She smiled at the camera and said, "Sometimes the people who raised us love us in ways that hurt. They mean well, but they control us through guilt. And as adults, we have to break free." Thousands of hearts and comments poured across the screen. People wrote things like, "Yes, I needed this today." She's describing my mother-in-law exactly. And I realized she wasn't talking about some client or theory. She was talking about me. My chest went tight. My hands shook. But I didn't say a word. I turned off the tablet and went to the kitchen where she later found me washing dishes. "Beatrice," she said, still smiling like she was on camera, "I hope you didn't take that last live stream personally." I looked up. "Should I?" She tilted her head. "I just meant, sometimes we hold too much emotional weight from older generations. I'm sure you understand that." I dried my hands, met her eyes, and said, "Yes. And I also understand projection when I see it." Her smile froze for half a second, then returned, wider, emptier. That was the first time I saw her drop the act, even if it was just for a moment. Over the next few weeks, she built her brand right inside my walls. She filmed videos about healing from controlling family with my curtains behind her. She gave online interviews describing how she was helping an elderly woman find her light again. That elderly woman was me. I wanted to tell her to stop, but Julian? He looked happy for the first time in years. He'd lost his confidence after his business failed, and Marilyn gave it back, or at least something that looked like it. She called him her co-producer. She made him feel important, and I knew if I went against her, I'd lose him again. So I stayed quiet. I told myself it wasn't worth the fight. That's what mothers do. We keep the peace even when it burns inside. But inside me, something was changing. Every day I watched a bit more of my home disappear, not physically, but in meaning. The walls that once echoed Arthur's lectures now repeated Marilyn's self-help slogans. The same halls where my son took his first steps now served as her healing walk for her followers. One morning she filmed a segment called "Letting Go of Guilt." She cried on camera, actual tears, saying how hard it was to live with someone who can't accept change. She said, "We have to love them from a distance, even if they're family." That clip reached 500,000 views in one day. And the comments, "Stay strong, Marilyn. Some people never evolve." Boundaries are everything. I didn't tell Julian I saw it. I didn't ask him if he'd watched it. But when he came home that evening, he looked at me differently, like I'd become the problem she'd described. He still hugged me, still said, "Good night, Mom." But the warmth was thinner. Words like confused, stuck, old-fashioned started slipping into his tone when he talked to me. It wasn't anger, it was pity. And pity, I've learned, can hurt more than hate. One night, I woke up around midnight to get water. I saw the light still on in the living room, faint through the crack of the door. I peeked inside. Marilyn was there, not filming, just sitting on the couch with her laptop open, scrolling through comments. She wasn't smiling. She looked tired, almost empty. Then I heard her whisper, "They love me more than he ever will." She closed the laptop, wiped her face, and walked upstairs. And that was the moment I realized she wasn't just playing a role for her audience. She believed it. She needed to be the hero in every story, even if she had to make me the villain. The next morning, she walked into the kitchen and poured herself coffee like she owned the place. "Beatrice," she said sweetly, "I hope you're not offended by how I talk about family online. It's not personal." I smiled back. "Of course not. After all, it's just content, right?" Her eyes flickered just for a second, before she looked down at her cup. "You're learning?" she said softly. Yes, I was, but not the way she thought. Because that day I started recording too. Not videos, but memories, moments, facts. She had her followers. But I had my notes. And sooner or later, one of us was going to run out of stories to tell. I remember that morning clearly. Marilyn came into the kitchen all smiles, like she always did when she wanted something. "Beatrice," she said, setting her coffee cup down gently, "I'm hosting a special group session today. A live healing circle. I want you to join us." I looked up from my tea. "A what?" "It's a safe space," she said, her voice soft and rehearsed. "We'll share stories, release emotional blockages, and connect. I think it would help you move forward." Move forward from what? I'd spent my whole life moving forward, through war, through loss, through widowhood. But I didn't say that. I just said, maybe next time. She tilted her head, that practiced little smile returning. "It would mean a lot to Julian if you joined." And that was it, the guilt card. I said yes, against my better judgment. By 2:00, strangers were walking through my front door. Young women with yoga mats and candles, a man carrying sound bowls, another setting up a camera. Marilyn had turned my reading room into something that looked like a cross between a therapy group and a performance stage. She called it the Circle of Release. My husband's books had been stacked in boxes to create space. The curtains were drawn halfway to let in intentional light, and there I was, the only one not dressed in white or beige. Marilyn introduced me like a guest speaker. "This is Beatrice," she said brightly. "She's been through so much loss, and today we'll hold space for her healing journey." My hands went cold. I hadn't agreed to talk about Arthur, not in front of strangers. But all eyes were on me, soft, curious, expectant. She placed a small microphone on the table in front of me. "Just share what you feel comfortable sharing," she said, then added, "Vulnerability is the first step to freedom." That sentence, I've heard it before. I taught it. But in her mouth, it didn't sound like compassion. It sounded like permission to invade. I started slowly. "My husband and I built this house together," I said. "We studied how people heal from emotional pain. He passed away here, peacefully." That was all I wanted to say. But Marilyn leaned forward. What was the hardest part of losing him? Her tone was gentle enough to sound caring, but there was something underneath it, something hungry. I froze. Someone murmured, "It's okay, take your time." Another nodded encouragingly, the way people do when they want you to break. And I did. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a quiet, steady cracking from the inside. I told them about Arthur's final months, about how we stopped talking about death because it made him sad, about how I'd wake up some nights and reach for him, forgetting he was gone. By the time I realized there were tears on my face, Marilyn was already saying, "That's beautiful, Beatrice. Thank you for sharing your truth." She turned to the camera. "You see, this is what healing looks like." It hit me then. She wasn't listening to me. She was using me. My grief was her content. As people clapped softly, I glanced around the circle. That's when I saw her. A familiar face. Emily Carter, one of my former students from Columbia. She looked older, of course, maybe in her 40s now, but the same sharp eyes. She used to sit in the front row asking questions about cognitive boundaries and consent in therapy. When our eyes met, hers flickered with recognition, and then confusion. I could see the question written across her face. "What are you doing here, Dr. Langley?" I didn't have an answer. After the session ended, Marilyn hugged me, in front of everyone, of course. "You were amazing," she whispered. "People loved your honesty." Then, louder to the group, "Let's thank Beatrice for being brave." They applauded. I smiled because that's what you do when you're cornered and don't want to make a scene. When the last person left, I went straight to my reading room. The boxes of books were still there, but something was off. 2 of Arthur's journals were missing. So were several folders of my old lecture notes on ethical therapy practices. When I asked Marilyn if she'd seen them, she said lightly, "Oh, maybe one of the guests picked them up by accident. Don't worry, we'll find them." But I knew we wouldn't. That night I couldn't sleep. The whole house felt different. I kept thinking about that camera. I didn't remember giving permission to record. Did they live stream it? Did strangers watch me cry? Around midnight, I went downstairs and looked through Marilyn's filming equipment. The memory card slot was empty. The camera bag was gone. I stood in the middle of the room that used to be my sanctuary and realized I just handed my most private pain to a woman who saw it as marketing. Before going back to bed, I wrote one line in my notebook. When kindness is recorded, it stops being kindness. The next morning, Marilyn acted like nothing had happened. She made pancakes, humming to herself, cheerful as ever. Julian was scrolling through his phone, showing her the comments on her new post. "Look," he said, "they love your healing circle idea." She beamed. "We'll make this a weekly thing." I sat across the table, holding my coffee mug, my hands still trembling slightly. Julian looked at me. "Mom, you were incredible yesterday. Everyone said your story was inspiring." "My story?" I said softly. "Julian, it wasn't a story." He hesitated, not understanding. Marilyn just smiled. "You should be proud, Beatrice. You touched a lot of hearts." "Yes," I said quietly, "and some people touched what they shouldn't have." She blinked, caught off guard for half a second. Then she laughed. "You're funny." But I wasn't joking. That day, I locked what was left of Arthur's journals in my bedroom safe. I started keeping my notebook with me at all times. Something told me that this wasn't just about my house anymore. It was about control, the same thing I'd spent my life studying, now playing out inside my own home. And the worst part? The people who once came to me for guidance now looked at me like I was the one who needed help. But I wasn't helpless. I was watching. And soon someone else would start watching too. Emily Carter, the student who once admired me, the woman who had seen through the performance that day, the only person perhaps who would believe me when everything started to fall apart. I've always believed that silence can teach you more than words. So when logic stopped working with Marilyn, I decided to try something else, something she'd never expect from a 74-year-old widow. I started to play the part she'd already written for me, the confused, forgetful old woman. It began small. One afternoon, I wrote a check for the gardener, the wrong amount on purpose. Instead of $120, I wrote $1,200. I left it on the kitchen counter where I knew Marilyn would see it. Sure enough, that evening she held it up with a gentle smile. "Beatrice, honey, are you sure about this? Maybe you misread the numbers." I blinked, pretending to think. "Oh dear. Perhaps I did." Her smile deepened, but it wasn't kind. It was satisfied. She patted my hand. "Don't worry, it happens. I'll keep an eye on things for you." Exactly what I wanted her to say. Over the next few weeks, I made more mistakes. I misplaced my glasses twice in one day. I called the bank to confirm a transfer that didn't exist. I even put salt in my tea instead of sugar and laughed about it at dinner. Julian looked at me with gentle concern. "Mom," he said one night, "maybe it's time to get some rest. You've been a bit forgetful lately." Marilyn was sitting beside him, nodding sympathetically. "She's under stress, Julian. It's normal at her age. But maybe we should talk about getting her some help." I didn't say a word. I just smiled and kept cutting my chicken. Inside, I was taking notes. That night, I wrote in my journal, first mention of memory issues. Marilyn introduced the idea. Julian reinforced it. Timing, dinner, casual setting, objective, normalized concern. When you've studied human behavior as long as I have, you stop reacting emotionally and start collecting data. That's what I was doing. Building a case. Every word, every glance, every concerned conversation went into the little red notebook. I began noticing patterns. Marilyn always brought up my forgetfulness when Julian was around. She never said it to me alone. It wasn't about helping. It was about shaping his perception. Control through suggestion. Classic manipulation. One morning, I overheard them in the dining room. They thought I was upstairs, but I'd paused in the hallway when I heard my name. "Julian, she left the stove on again," Marilyn whispered. "I turned it off, but it's getting dangerous. What if she hurts herself?" "I know," he said softly. "I'm just not ready to move her yet." "She doesn't need to move," Marilyn replied. "She needs supervision. Maybe that retirement community we saw online. The one in Lexington." There was a pause. Then Julian sighed, the sound of a man trying to be responsible but terrified of guilt. "I'll talk to her soon." My hands tightened around the banister. They weren't talking about me like I was there. They were talking about me like I was already gone. Later that day, Marilyn brought me tea. Chamomile, her idea of peace. "Beatrice," she said sweetly, "have you ever thought about what you'd like, if living here ever gets too hard?" I pretended to think. "You mean, if I can't take care of myself?" She nodded carefully. "Exactly. There are really nice places now. Independent living, very comfortable, very safe." "Oh," I said with a soft smile, "I'm not ready for that. But if I forget again, maybe you can remind me." She smiled, but I could see it in her eyes. She thought she was winning. That evening, Julian came into my study while I was pretending to sort through mail. He sat down awkwardly. "Mom, don't get upset," he began. "We're just worried. Maybe we should start looking at options for when, things change." I turned to him, feigning confusion. "Options for what?" He hesitated. "Just in case you ever need more support." "Like a nursing home?" I said gently. He winced at the word. "It's not like that, Mom." I reached over and touched his hand. "Julian, sweetheart, I know you mean well, but don't worry, I'm not going anywhere." He looked relieved and guilty. That's the thing about my son. He wants to do the right thing, but he doesn't always know what it is, and Marilyn knows exactly how to use that. That night, after they went to bed, I sat at my desk, the house silent again. I opened my notebook and flipped through pages of tiny, tight handwriting. Every lie, every mistake, every word of pity recorded like evidence in a trial that hadn't begun yet. I wrote, "They believe the performance. The seed is planted. Stage 2, confirmation." I locked the notebook in the drawer, turned off the lamp, and sat in the dark for a while. I thought about the patients I'd counseled years ago, women who doubted their instincts until it was too late, who stayed silent because they were afraid of being called dramatic or delusional. I used to tell them, "You can't control what people say about you, but you can control what you remember." Now those words were mine to live by. The next morning, Marilyn greeted me cheerfully. "Good morning, Beatrice. Sleep well?" "Oh, yes," I said, though I did have the strangest dream. She smiled. "Oh, what about?" "I dreamed I forgot where I put my will," I said, watching her face carefully. She froze for just half a second and then laughed. "You and your sense of humor." I smiled back. "Yes, I do forget things sometimes, but never the important ones." That wiped the smile clean off her face. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. She thought she was writing the story of my decline. But what she didn't realize was that I was writing a story too, one that would end very differently. The trap was set. Now, all I had to do was wait for her to step into it. It was Teresa who found it first. Teresa Doyle, my lawyer, and one of the few people who still called to check on me without an agenda. She phoned one afternoon, her voice unusually sharp. "Beatrice, we need to talk. It's about your property deed." At first, I thought she meant the tax papers. "Did I forget to sign something?" I asked. "No," she said slowly. "You didn't forget, but someone else didn't want you to remember." There was a pause, the kind that makes your stomach drop. "I have a copy here," she continued. "It's a transfer of ownership document for Langley Mansion. It has your signature, but it's not your handwriting. The transferee is Marilyn Reyes." I went silent, not shocked, just quiet, the way you get when a storm you've been predicting finally arrives. Teresa asked if she should come over. I told her no. I needed to see it myself first. That evening, I walked downstairs and found Marilyn in the living room, sitting cross-legged on the couch with her laptop open, typing away as if she owned the place. Maybe on paper she already did. "Marilyn," I said gently, "do you know anything about a property transfer? A document with my name on it?" She didn't look up right away. Then she closed the laptop, crossed her legs, and smiled. "Oh, that," she said lightly, as if we were talking about a grocery list. "Yes, of course. You signed it weeks ago." "I did?" I asked, pretending to think. "Yes," she said, tilting her head, her tone dripping with false concern. "You must have forgotten, Beatrice. You were a bit flustered that day. It was part of the retirement paperwork, remember?" Her voice was slow, patient, the kind people use with children or patients in a hospital. I didn't blink. I just smiled. "Ah, yes. Maybe I did." She looked pleased with herself, like a magician whose trick had landed perfectly. Inside, I was trembling. Not from fear, from clarity. That was the moment everything snapped into focus. All the little changes, the whispers, the staged kindness, they weren't random. She wasn't just taking over my house. She was taking over me. I'd been studying her for months without realizing it. Every tactic she used, every phrase, every lie, I'd seen them all before, in other people's stories. But now I was the case study. And that was fine. Because unlike her, I took notes. Julian came home that night while Marilyn was cooking dinner. He looked tired, distracted. I waited until she went upstairs to freshen up before I spoke. "Julian," I said softly, "did you sign any documents for me recently? Anything with my name?" He frowned. "No, I don't think so." "Why?" "Teresa found a property transfer," I said. "It's under Marilyn's name." His face went pale. "That can't be right." "I hope not," I said. "But tell me, was there a day when she asked me to sign something and you were nearby?" He rubbed his forehead, thinking. "There was that day with the insurance papers. You were on the phone. She said she'd explain later. I didn't look at it." I nodded slowly. "I see." He stared at me, guilt spreading across his face. "Mom, she said it was for your health insurance renewal. I didn't—" "It's all right," I said quietly. "You trusted her. That's what she counts on." The next morning, I called Teresa back. "We're not confronting her yet," I said. "Not until I have everything documented. I want her to think I still believe her story." Teresa hesitated. "Beatrice, she's already forged your signature. She's committing fraud. We need to act fast." "We will," I said, "but not until she shows her hand." She exhaled slowly. "All right, just promise me one thing. Don't let her corner you alone." I promised. Then I hung up and made myself a cup of tea, my hands steady for the first time in weeks. That evening, Marilyn appeared in the doorway of my study. She leaned against the frame, smiling, holding a stack of mail. "You've been so busy lately," she said sweetly. "I thought I'd help sort through your paperwork again." I looked up from my desk, returning her smile. "That's kind of you," I said. "But I'd rather do it myself. My memory may be fading, but my fingers still work." Her smile faltered just slightly. Then she laughed. "You're so funny, Beatrice. You always make me laugh." "I'm glad," I said. "You'll need a sense of humor where this is going." She tilted her head. "What do you mean?" "Oh, nothing," I said. "Just an old woman's joke." That night, I sat in the quiet of my room and opened my red notebook again. Under the latest entry, I wrote, "Stage 3, exposure. Maintain calm. Let her believe the illusion. Use her arrogance." Then I slipped the notebook into my locked drawer and looked around the room, at the walls, the photos, the house that was mine in every way that mattered. She could steal paper, signatures, titles, but she would never own the truth. And soon I would make sure the whole world knew it. When you've been alive as long as I have, you learn one important truth. Sometimes help comes from the most unexpected places. In my case, that help came from Clarence Monroe, a name I hadn't heard in over 20 years. Clarence used to rent the carriage house behind Langley Mansion when he was a student at the community college. A quiet young man, polite, always fixing things around the property to save on rent. He used to call me Doc Langley. I taught him how to structure essays and how to tell when people were lying, an interest he never outgrew. Now, decades later, I learned through an old neighbor that Clarence was a licensed private investigator. So, one afternoon, I found his number and called. He picked up on the second ring. Monroe Investigations. Clarence, I said, this is Beatrice Langley. There was a pause, then a low whistle. Doc Langley, I'll be damned. I used to mow your lawn. Yes, I said with a small smile, and now I think I might need you to save it. 2 days later, he came to the mansion. Still tall, still quiet, though the boyish charm had hardened into something more deliberate. He carried a small black case and a notebook. We sat in the kitchen, the one place Marilyn never lingered for long. I told him everything, not just about the forged deed, but the months of manipulation, the live streams, the staged concern, the whispered talk of nursing homes. He didn't interrupt once, he just nodded, taking careful notes. When I finished, he closed his notebook and said, Doc, I've handled domestic fraud, false identity, elder exploitation. But what you're describing? This isn't just theft, it's grooming, financial and emotional. She's good at it. I know, I said softly. That's why I need proof. Not just words. Proof strong enough that even my son can't deny it. He nodded. Then we start small. Cameras, mail logs, transaction trails. You'd be surprised how much a manipulator leaves behind when they think you're too old to notice. For the next week, Clarence worked quietly. He came by pretending to be a handyman checking on the heating system. Marilyn barely glanced at him. She was too busy planning her next healing retreat. By the end of that week, he had already found the first piece of evidence. Doc, he said, handing me a small velvet pouch. You're going to want to see this. Inside was a tiny recording device, no bigger than my thumb, covered in dust. He'd found it inside the hollow base of an antique statue that sat in the hallway, a statue Marilyn had moved months ago for better lighting. It's voice-activated, he said. Picks up anything within 20 feet. Looks like it's been here for months. He connected it to his laptop. The playback was scratchy at first, footsteps, muffled voices, and then, clear as day, Marilyn's voice filled the kitchen. If she forgets again, just go along with it, Julian. The goal is to make her trust me completely. She's already starting to, Julian said quietly. Marilyn laughed softly. Good. Once she does, she'll sign whatever I put in front of her. My throat tightened. I couldn't even breathe for a few seconds. Clarence hit pause. There's more, he said carefully. A lot more. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. Doc, I ran a background check on Marilyn Reyes. That's not her real name. I blinked. Of course it isn't, I said dryly. Her legal name used to be Marilyn R. Kane, he continued. She was investigated in Florida 7 years ago. Same pattern. Older clients, spiritual wellness retreats, missing funds. Case was settled quietly, but she changed her name after that and moved north. I sat back in my chair, the air leaving my chest. So she's done this before. More than once, he said. 3 different states. She's smart. Never enough evidence for a conviction. Until now. He tapped the recorder. This changes everything. We decided not to confront her yet. Instead, Clarence advised me to act normal, to let her believe her plan was still working. He'd come by occasionally, pretending to check the plumbing or electrical systems, gathering more information each time. But manipulators have instincts too. A few days later, Clarence called me sounding uneasy. Doc, I think someone's on to me. What do you mean? I got an anonymous email last night. No name, no signature. It said, stay out of what doesn't concern you. Could it be her? I asked. Probably. She's scared now, which means we're close. That evening, Marilyn seemed tense. Her usual bright smile was gone. She moved through the house like she was checking for something. Drawers, doors, corners. At dinner, she barely touched her food. Julian asked what was wrong, and she just said, nothing, just tired. But her eyes kept flicking toward me like she was trying to read my thoughts. I kept my face calm, even warm. Everything all right, dear? I asked. She forced a smile. Of course, Beatrice, everything's wonderful. She didn't know that Clarence had already backed up every file, every recording, and every document we'd found, and stored them somewhere safe. 2 nights later, he stopped by to drop off a manila folder. Inside were transcripts of the recordings, photos of the hidden device, and copies of Marilyn's old case files. He looked tired but determined. "Doc, you've got everything you need to end this, but it's your call how we play it." I stared at the papers. Each page was another piece of her mask falling away, and yet I felt no anger, just something colder. Resolve. "I'll handle the timing," I said. "You just stay safe." He smiled faintly. "You always were the one teaching the rest of us how to stay 3 steps ahead." As he left, I stood at the window watching his taillights fade down the driveway. For the first time in months, I felt the mansion breathe again. Not peace exactly, but awareness. The walls that had listened to her lies were now holding her truth, and the next move would be mine. It was a Saturday morning when Marilyn made her big announcement. She called it the Healing Families Workshop. Flyers appeared around town, posts went up online, and soon strangers were signing up to come to my house, the Langley Mansion, to witness a live demonstration of emotional breakthrough and forgiveness. Apparently, I was to be the special guest, or as she said, our living example of reconciliation. Julian was thrilled. "Mom, it's good PR. People will see how strong you are." I smiled. "Yes, dear, I'm sure they will." Inside, I knew exactly what was coming, and for once I was ready. The day of the workshop, the mansion looked unrecognizable again. Rows of chairs lined the living room. Cameras and soft lights pointed toward the fireplace. There were signs that said, "Let go, heal, rebuild." Even the scent in the air was different, that same artificial lavender she always used when she wanted to control the mood. Dozens of people arrived. Some were local followers, others from out of state. They greeted Marilyn like she was a celebrity. She glided around the room, graceful and glowing, shaking hands, laughing loudly. When she introduced me, she placed a hand on my shoulder like she owned me. "This beautiful soul," she said to the audience, "is Beatrice. She's taught me so much about patience and unconditional love." The room applauded. Cameras flashed. I smiled and nodded, saying nothing. She began her talk, walking slowly around the room as she spoke. "Sometimes we inherit emotional wounds from those who came before us," she said. "We must learn to forgive, even when they don't understand." Her voice dripped with pity. I knew what she was doing. She wasn't healing anyone. She was preparing her audience to watch her publicly redeem herself, at my expense. Halfway through, she paused dramatically. "Today," she said, we're going to practice honesty, real, raw honesty." She turned toward me. "Beatrice, would you join me up here?" I stood. My hands didn't shake. She smiled. "Tell us about your journey, how it feels to release resentment." I looked at her for a moment, then at the audience. They were watching us like a scene in a play. "Yes," I said. "Honesty. That's exactly what we need." I reached into my purse and took out a small black recorder, the same one Clarence had found inside the antique statue. I placed it gently on the table beside me and clicked play. Her voice filled the room instantly. "If she forgets again, just go along with it, Julian. The goal is to make her trust me completely." "She's already starting to." "Good. Once she does, she'll sign whatever I put in front of her." Gasps spread through the crowd. Marilyn froze, her perfect smile cracking for the first time since I'd met her. Where did you get that?" she stammered. I looked at her calmly. "From the same house you turned into your stage." The room went silent. Even the cameras stopped moving. Then, from the back, a voice whispered, "Is that her?" Another phone came up, recording. Then another. People were already sharing it. I turned toward the audience. "This woman came into my home under the name Marilyn Reyes," I said, my tone steady. "But that's not her name, and this isn't her first time doing this. I have documentation of previous investigations, different states, same pattern." Marilyn tried to laugh it off. "That's ridiculous. You're confused." I cut her off. "You said the same thing when you forged my signature." The color drained from her face. Julian stood up wide-eyed. "Mom, what is this?" "Proof," I said simply. "Something you should have asked for months ago." The event collapsed in chaos. People whispered, some left immediately, others stayed to film. Marilyn tried to regain control, raising her voice over the noise. "This is manipulation. She's trying to destroy me." I looked at her one last time and said, "No, Marilyn, you did that yourself." I turned and walked out before she could respond. Behind me, I heard a reporter, yes, a real one, asking questions. Is it true about the forged documents? About the name change? By the next morning, it was everywhere. Clips of the confrontation had gone viral. Life coach exposed during live healing workshop. That was the headline. Her followers divided instantly, half in disbelief, half enraged. She deleted her accounts within 2 days, but the internet never forgets. Julian didn't speak to me for almost a week. When he finally came by, he didn't yell. He just sat at the kitchen table and said, "You embarrassed her in front of everyone?" I nodded. "No, Julian. She embarrassed herself. I just turned on the light." He didn't answer, but his eyes looked different. The first flicker of doubt, the first crack in the wall she'd built between us. That night, after he left, I stood alone in the quiet mansion. For the first time in months, it actually felt quiet. No staged lighting, no fake music, no artificial lavender. Just silence. Real silence. I knew this wasn't the end. People like Marilyn don't go down without a fight. But it was the first time I didn't feel like a guest in my own home. It was the first time I felt like myself again. After the chaos of the workshop, the mansion felt heavier than ever, like the walls themselves were still carrying the echoes of everything that had been said. For days, I avoided the living room. The lights, the stage, the chairs, all reminders of what she'd turned my home into. Then, one rainy afternoon, I went in to dust the piano. Arthur's piano. It had sat in the same corner since we moved in, untouched for years. He used to play it every evening after dinner. Nothing fancy, just soft jazz, or sometimes simple chords while I worked on case notes nearby. He always said the piano was the house's heartbeat. I ran my fingers across the lid and felt something shift beneath. A loose panel. Arthur used to build hidden compartments into everything, a habit from his tinkering days. I smiled, remembering how I'd tease him about turning our house into a spy novel. But when I lifted the panel this time, what I found wasn't one of his usual gadgets. It was a small black box, no bigger than a jewelry case. On it, written in his handwriting, were the words, "For Beatrice, if you ever forget who they are." My chest tightened. My hands shook a little as I opened it. Inside was a small reel of magnetic tape, part of one of our old sound therapy prototypes. Arthur and I had spent years researching how memory and emotion responded to frequency. He called it empathic resonance, sound that could reach places words couldn't. We never patented it. It was just our shared project, our quiet little miracle. I still remember the day he finished the prototype. We were younger then. Him with his glasses slipping down his nose, me scribbling notes as the recording played through our old monitor speakers. We believed sound could heal the human mind. He believed in people, I believed in proof. That's what made us work. Now, decades later, I pressed play. A low hum filled the room, followed by Arthur's voice, steady, warm, achingly familiar. If you're hearing this, B, it means I'm not there to say it myself. But I know you. You'd only listen if you had to. So listen carefully. You've spent your life helping people who pretend to be broken so they can break others. The ones who speak softly but plant fear in the hearts of those who love them. They hide behind charm, behind care, behind healing. But what they really crave is control. When you meet one, don't try to fix them. Don't debate them. Just expose them. Truth is the one sound they can't stand. I sat very still, tears sliding down my cheeks before I even realized it. He had always known the type who turned empathy into a weapon, the type who could take something sacred, like healing, and twist it into self-worship. He'd seen them in his work, and now, years later, one had found her way into my home. I listened again to the soft background noise, to the faint creak of the piano bench as he adjusted the E microphone. In that moment, I could almost see him again. His sleeves rolled up, his smile tired but proud, the same man who'd tell me, "B, you can't control what people do, but you can always control when you stop letting them." I closed the box and held it to my chest. For months, I had fought to prove my sanity to people who decided I'd lost it. But this was proof of something greater. Proof that the man I loved still stood beside me, even after death. That evening, I set the box on my desk beside Clarence's files and the red notebook. 3 symbols of 3 kinds of truth: the evidence I'd gathered, the corruption we'd uncovered, and the voice that had guided me long before any of this began. Outside, thunder rolled over Langley Mansion, low and distant, like the sound of a curtain falling after a long, ugly play. I knew then it was time to end it. Time to reclaim everything. The house, my name, my peace. I wasn't scared anymore, because Arthur was right. Truth, when spoken clearly enough, doesn't need to scream. It just needs to be heard. And tomorrow, I'd make sure everyone heard it. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. For the first time in months, I wasn't afraid of what the day might bring. On my desk sat 3 things: Clarence's folder, my red notebook, and Arthur's black box from the piano. The past, the proof, and the truth. Everything I needed. I brewed a pot of tea, sat down at the kitchen table, and began my final task: organizing everything. Every document, every transcript, every forged signature, every recording. I labeled each envelope carefully, the way I used to prepare case files at the university. By the time the sun came through the window, the stack was ready. At 9 sharp, I made the first call, to the Office for Elder Protection and Fraud Prevention. Then the second, to the Lexington Tribune, where an investigative journalist had already been following the fallout from Marilyn's workshop. And finally, the third, to my lawyer, Teresa. "Are you sure about this?" Teresa asked. "Completely," I said. "It's time she answers for what she's done, to me, and to whoever came before me." By the end of that week, the world began to shift. The recordings, the documents, the footage from her healing event, all of it was verified and published. Headlines multiplied. Life coach accused of elder fraud and forgery. Langley Mansion scandal, forged deed exposed. Therapy influencer under investigation for identity theft. Reporters camped outside the mansion gates for days, but I never came out to speak. I didn't need to. The evidence spoke for itself. Marilyn was charged with multiple counts: property fraud, identity theft, medical misrepresentation, and unlawful surveillance. Clarence's findings about her previous aliases and past investigations gave prosecutors exactly what they needed. They called it a pattern of systematic deception. I called it the truth, finally catching up. Julian came by 2 nights later. He didn't knock. He just stood in the doorway, pale and shaking. "Mom," he said quietly, "they're saying awful things about her online. That she lied about everything." I looked at him for a long time. He looked so much like Arthur when he was lost, trying to find reason in a storm he'd helped create. "She did," I said softly, "and you helped her do it." He sank into a chair. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't." "I know," I said, "but that doesn't make it hurt less." He buried his face in his hands. "What happens now?" I poured him tea. "Now, we let justice do what it's meant to do. The truth doesn't need anger. It just needs patience." He didn't answer. But when he finally looked up, there were tears in his eyes. Not just guilt, but something else. Recognition. The next morning, I received an email from the Tribune. They wanted a quote for their follow-up article. I wrote 1 sentence. "I didn't fight to destroy anyone's life. I fought to reclaim my own." That was all. I closed my laptop, walked into the living room, and opened the curtains. Light poured in, catching the dust in the air like tiny flecks of gold. The mansion felt lighter now, like it could breathe again. I ran my fingers along the piano's smooth surface and whispered, "Arthur, it's done." For months, I had been painted as a confused old woman, fragile, forgetful, fading. Now, I was none of those things. I was simply seen. That evening, the phone rang. It was Teresa. "The court's frozen the property transfers," she said. You're safe now. The house is legally yours again." I thanked her, hung up, and stood for a long time in the middle of the hallway. The same hall where Marilyn once filmed her speeches about healing and letting go. Now it was just mine. Quiet, honest, real. I didn't celebrate. I didn't even smile. I just exhaled, a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for months. Justice isn't loud. It's slow and steady and final. And when it comes, it doesn't ask for applause. It simply restores what should never have been taken. For a week after the news broke, Julian disappeared. He didn't answer calls, didn't reply to my messages. Clarence said he'd moved out of Marilyn's apartment and was staying with an old friend near the coast. I didn't chase him. I'd done enough chasing for one lifetime. The mansion was quiet again, too quiet. Sometimes I caught myself listening for his footsteps, the way he used to come down the hall as a boy, dragging his blanket behind him, asking if he could sleep in our bed just one more night. But that boy was gone. The man he'd become needed to face himself without me holding the mirror. 10 days later, a letter arrived. Real paper, real ink, addressed in his handwriting. It had been years since I'd seen him write anything by hand. The envelope was creased, the ink slightly smudged, as if he'd hesitated a dozen times before sealing it. I sat by the window with a cup of tea and opened it slowly. Mom, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect you to read this. But I need to write it, if only to stop hearing my own guilt echoing back at me. When you told me about the forged papers, I wanted to believe it was a mistake. I couldn't face the truth, that the woman I loved was capable of that, and that I'd helped her do it. I defended her even when something inside me knew I was wrong. After everything came out, I went through the boxes she left behind. In one of them, I found Dad's letters, the ones you thought were lost. My breath caught. Arthur's letters. He must have hidden them after the funeral, letters I'd never seen. I read mine first. It wasn't long. Dad told me that being a man wasn't about strength or success. It was about integrity. He said, if you ever forget who you are, go back to the things you were proud of when you were a boy. Mom, I've been doing that. I've been remembering. I remembered the science fair in 5th grade when you both stayed up all night helping me build that weather model. I remembered Dad teaching me to sand the piano legs until they shone. I remembered you standing in the rain at my high school graduation because every seat was taken, and you didn't complain once. You both raised me to think for myself, and somehow I stopped doing that. I let someone else do the thinking and the lying for me. I don't know if I can ever make it right, but I want to learn again, to be the kind of son Dad would still recognize, and the kind of man you could be proud of. I love you, Mom. I'm sorry for everything. Julian. When I finished reading, I didn't cry. Not at first. I just sat there, staring at his handwriting, tracing the lines of each letter like a map of a person trying to find his way home. That night, I went into Arthur's study. The piano box still sat on the desk, beside the notebook and the old sound recorder. I played the tape again, not for proof this time, but for peace. Arthur's voice filled the room, steady and kind. As ever. Forgiveness is not forgetting, Bea. It's remembering without letting it poison you. I smiled faintly. You always get the last word, don't you? The next morning, Julian showed up at the door. He looked thinner, older somehow. He didn't try to come in, just stood there on the porch, holding nothing but his car keys. I got your letter, I said. He nodded. I didn't know if you'd read it. I did. He looked down at his shoes. I don't know what to say that would matter. Then don't say anything, I replied. Silence stretched between us, heavy but not angry, like a pause between breaths. Finally, I said quietly, Julian, I can't forgive you yet. Not because I hate you, but because forgiveness without change is just permission. He looked up, tears in his eyes. I understand. I took a slow breath. If you want me to listen again, truly listen, then you'll have to relearn what your father tried to teach you. Not money, not success, ethics. He nodded. I will. Then we'll see, I said. I turned to go back inside but paused. You can visit the garden next week if you like. The roses need trimming. They always did better when you helped. His eyes widened slightly, the smallest flicker of hope. Okay, he whispered. I'll come. After he left, I sat by the window again, watching the light move through the garden. For the first time, I didn't see ruin. I saw rebuilding. Not forgiveness yet, but possibility. Arthur used to say healing wasn't a straight line. It was a circle. And maybe, after everything, Julian and I were finally beginning ours. I picked up his letter once more and whispered, If you're really learning again, son, then I'm listening. A year passed, the seasons changed, and with them, the house changed too. Langley Mansion no longer felt like a prison or a battlefield. The shadows had lifted. The walls, once echoing with manipulation and deceit, now carried a different kind of sound. Laughter, conversation, and the quiet hum of people healing. It started with an idea. one that came to me after receiving a letter from Emily Carter, my former student. She'd written, "You once taught me how to recognize emotional abuse in others. I think it's time we teach people how to protect themselves from it." That single line became the seed. Together, we decided to reopen the mansion, not as a private home, but as a place for recovery and education. We called it the Langley Emotional Recovery Center. The same halls that had once hidden lies would now host workshops on truth. The same rooms that were used to stage deception would now help people reclaim their sense of self. On the morning of our first class, I stood by the front door, watching the new sign being hung. Langley Emotional Recovery Center. Awareness, boundaries, healing. The air smelled of fresh paint and blooming roses. Julian had replanted them himself that spring, one quiet act of repair after a long silence. We were speaking again now, slowly, cautiously. He volunteered to manage the grounds. "I owe this house a lot," he'd said, "and I owe you more." I didn't correct him. Sometimes letting someone rebuild is better than saying, "I forgive you." The first session began in the same living room where Marilyn once preached her false gospel of healing. But this time, the lights were soft, not staged. The chairs were arranged in a circle, not an audience, and the air felt honest. I looked around the room, a dozen faces, men and women of all ages. Some were survivors of manipulation, others were therapists or caretakers wanting to learn, and standing near the back, organizing papers, was Emily. She smiled when she saw me, that same kind, determined smile she'd had as a student years ago. She was now a licensed counselor, and today she was my teaching assistant. I began simply, "Good morning, everyone. My name is Beatrice Langley. Some of you may know my story, but today, this isn't about me. It's about you, and the parts of you that someone tried to make small." A few people nodded. One woman wiped her eyes. "When people think of manipulation," I continued, "they imagine shouting, anger, or cruelty. But real manipulation often sounds like concern. It looks like kindness. It hides behind love, behind family, behind healing." I paused, letting the words settle. "I want you to understand something important. What happened to you doesn't define your weakness. It defines someone else's hunger for control. But learning to name it, to see it clearly, that's how you take your power back." The room was quiet, the kind of silence that means people are listening with their whole hearts. I glanced at Emily. She gave a small nod, the same encouraging gesture I'd once given her years ago during lectures. We'd come full circle. After the session, a few participants stayed behind. One older man said softly, "I thought I was crazy for doubting my daughter-in-law. Hearing your story helped me see I wasn't." I smiled. "Doubt isn't madness," I told him. "Sometimes it's your mind's way of keeping you safe." Emily handed out pamphlets, recognizing coercive control, rebuilding after betrayal. She'd written most of them herself. I couldn't have been prouder. As the last guest left, the afternoon light filtered through the stained glass windows we'd restored, the same ones Marilyn once wanted to tear out. They cast warm colors across the floor, like fragments of the past pieced together into something beautiful again. Julian appeared in the doorway, holding 2 cups of tea. "How did it go?" he asked. "Better than I ever dreamed," I said. He smiled faintly. "Dad would have loved this." "Yes," I whispered, "he already does." We sat together in the garden afterward, the air filled with the scent of roses. I realized then that healing isn't about forgetting the people who broke you. It's about remembering yourself before they did. Langley Mansion had been through betrayal, deceit, and silence, but now it had a new purpose: to teach others how to recognize the signs before they lose themselves too. I looked up at the old house, proud, timeless, steady. It wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to everyone who needed a place to remember their worth, and for the first time in years I felt it. Not revenge, not triumph, but peace. Simple, steady peace. It was a Sunday morning, calm, sunlit, and ordinary in all the best ways. The Langley Emotional Recovery Center had just finished another weekend workshop. The students were gone, the chairs neatly stacked, the smell of coffee still lingering in the air. I was wiping down the table when I heard the front door open. No knock this time, just the slow, hesitant sound of footsteps I'd known all my life. "Mom?" Julian stood in the doorway, his hands shoved in his pockets, his eyes soft but uncertain. He looked better, a little more grounded, a little more himself. He'd been working with Clarence on a community outreach project, helping organize fraud prevention seminars for seniors. Clarence had told me he was trying, And trying, I've learned, is its own kind of redemption. "Hello, Julian," I said. "It's been a while." He nodded. "A few months." Then, quieter, "I've been thinking a lot. About what you said. About Dad." I set the cloth down and waited. He took a breath. "I wanted to ask if maybe I could help here. At the center, I mean. Volunteer, do the small things. Cleaning, setting up chairs, taking notes. Whatever you need." I studied his face. He wasn't the confident man who once let others speak for him. He was just a son, standing before his mother, finally willing to earn his way back into her trust. "What made you decide that?" I asked gently. He looked around the room, at the shelves of self-help books, the circle of chairs, the framed photo of Arthur at the piano. "Because I spent so much time believing I was helping people when I was really helping someone hurt them. I want to learn what it actually means to do good. From the beginning this time." The sincerity in his voice didn't need embellishment. It was real. I walked over to the stack of pamphlets by the door and picked one up. Understanding Manipulation and Ethical Responsibility. One of the introductory classes I designed for new volunteers. I handed it to him. "Sign up," I said. He blinked, surprised. "You mean, like a student?" I nodded. "That's how everyone starts here. You study first, then you serve. We don't skip lessons just because we share blood." He gave a small, almost nervous smile. "Fair enough. And if I finish?" I smiled back. "Then," I said, "we'll have lunch together." He laughed softly, a sound I hadn't heard from him in years. "Lunch sounds good." He took the pamphlet carefully like something fragile and looked at it for a long moment before tucking it into his jacket. Then he said, "You know, Dad would have liked this place. The colors, the calm, it feels like him." "Yes," I said, "it does." As he left to sign up at the front desk, I stood by the window watching him cross the courtyard. The roses had bloomed early that year, soft pink and pale yellow, the way Arthur had loved them. Julian stopped for a moment, bent down and touched one of the blossoms. There was something in that gesture, simple, quiet, but full of understanding. He wasn't seeking forgiveness anymore. He was earning peace one act at a time. When he turned back and waved, I waved too. Then I returned to the table, picked up my red notebook, and wrote the day's final entry. Sunday, 10 a.m. Julian came by today. He asked to volunteer. I gave him a pamphlet, told him to enroll first. He smiled. It felt like the house exhaled with me. I think we're both finally learning. Healing isn't something you get from others. It's something you build together, quietly, one day at a time. I closed the notebook, placed it on the piano, and looked around the room. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, painting the walls in color, amber, blue, rose. Arthur once said music is just truth wrapped in sound. Maybe this center, these people, this peace, was the same. Truth wrapped in forgiveness. And as I listened to the faint hum of the afternoon wind, I whispered, "Lesson complete." It has been almost 2 years since the mansion reopened. The rooms are filled with new laughter now, not the kind that hides pain, but the kind that grows from it. Every Sunday afternoon, the Rose Garden fills with voices, survivors sharing stories, students asking questions, and volunteers arranging chairs beneath the old oak tree. The Langley mansion has learned to breathe again, and yet sometimes, in the quiet hours before dusk, I still think of Marilyn. No one knows exactly where she went. Some say she left the country. Others think she changed her name again, blending into a new city, a new life. But it doesn't matter anymore, because I finally understand something Arthur once tried to teach me. Darkness doesn't end when the person leaves. It ends when you stop feeding it. Still, the world moves in circles. A few months ago, my students noticed several new online healers using the same tone, the same phrasing, too polished to be coincidence. They sent me screenshots worried. "Is it happening again?" one of them asked. I smiled. "Perhaps, but now we know what to look for." One of those healers, a young woman named Samantha Vale, started her online channel preaching about boundaries and self-love. Her words sounded familiar, too familiar. Within weeks, followers began to question her credentials, and one of our volunteers reached out, offering education and guidance. Instead of rage or denial, Samantha admitted she had been imitating others. She joined our next workshop not as a teacher, but as a student. That moment stayed with me. It reminded me that not everyone who copies harm does so out of malice. Some are simply lost, chasing belonging, mistaking attention for purpose, and sometimes what once felt like threat is only another soul asking quietly to be taught. This spring, I was invited to speak at the World Conference on Emotional Awareness in Chicago. It wasn't about confrontation this time. It was about healing, what it means to live after manipulation, how to turn vigilance into compassion. As I stood before the audience, I looked out and saw faces full of stories. People who had been deceived, betrayed, silenced. And yet, here they were, ready to listen, ready to live again. "My name is Beatrice Langley," I began. "And I've learned that healing isn't about forgetting the people who hurt us. It's about remembering the truth they couldn't destroy." The hall grew still. "Manipulators don't truly disappear," I continued. "They shift shapes, change voices, wear new kindness. But we don't need to fear that anymore. Because once you learn to listen, not to the noise around you, but to the quiet truth inside, no one can ever take you away from yourself again." I paused, feeling that truth settle in the room like soft light. Around me, heads nodded, eyes glistened, not with anger, but with recognition. We were no longer victims. We were witnesses and teachers. After the talk, a young woman approached me, trembling, tearful, grateful. She said, "I almost followed someone like her again. But then I heard your story, and I stopped. I started listening to myself." I took her hand and said, "That's what healing sounds like. Not loud, not proud, just quiet clarity." As I walked back to my hotel that evening, the city lights shimmered across the lake, reflected in still water, and I thought about Marilyn, not with hatred, not with pity, but with a strange, gentle understanding. People like her will always exist, but so will people like us. The light doesn't chase the dark away by fighting it. It simply keeps shining long enough for others to find their way. Back home, I added one more line to my red journal before bed. Marilyn vanished. But so did the fear. What remains is awareness, and the quiet joy of seeing others learn to protect their own peace. Outside my window, the wind moved softly through the roses Arthur planted. The house was calm, alive, awake. The tremors of the past had settled into something steadier, wisdom, not worry. And for the first time, I truly believed it. The story wasn't about her anymore. It was about everyone who learned to listen again, including me.